Good morning and welcome to a webinar. My name is Andy Deal with Saratech. I'm your host for this event. With me is Sarah Atsugi, who will be monitoring the chat and QA. Today, we will be discussing how to leverage 3D printing to minimize supply chain disruptions. And I'm pleased to announce that joining us are two special guests and friends of mine, Isabel Sanz and Jeff Rickey from HP. We live in difficult times, and really that's not news to anyone in 2020, right? I'm so glad this year will be over soon. With that said, companies must adjust how they conduct business in this climate, from optimizing product development to managing supply chain. How do we do things better and more efficiently? So Isabel and Jeff will be sharing with us ways to minimize supply chain issues using HP 3D printing technology. A little bit about Saratech. As an engineering company, we love helping customers realize better products by solving engineering and business issues. Saratech builds long-term relationships with our customers by supplying engineering expertise, engineering services, software, and manufacturing solutions to improve their product development experiences. Our engineering team uses in production the software and tools that we sell and support, at the same time employing industry best practices and methodologies. We're headquartered in Orange County, California, but we have people throughout the United States to best support customers across the country. Now I would like to pass the presentation over to Isabel and Jeff.
Yes, perfect. Well, thank you, Andy, for the introduction. As you were mentioning, this year has been an interesting year for everyone, and today what we would like to share is how we could make our supply chains more robust and how the usage of additive manufacturing and in particular MultiJet fusion could really benefit all companies in order to make all this process more efficient and more lean. And having said this, I will pass it over to Jeff to talk about this. What is a supply chain disruption?
Thank you, Isabel. So I just wanted to start with a couple stories. We have, in this world that we live in today, and I'm sure all of you have experienced, like I have, there's a lot of vendors that are struggling with supply chain, specifically offshore or overseas type suppliers that are providing products for American-based companies. One of which is a customer of ours in Huntington Beach. They currently have 2 production MJF units there, and you're going to learn more about that later, about what a production MJF machine really means. But they were struggling with getting switches from their China supplier, and decided to redesign that switch and print it within our technology. So that's just one example. I also have a personal example. I'm an avid golfer, and I don't know how many of you on the call today are avid golfers, but when COVID hit and all the golf courses shut down, I started searching for a golf simulator. So I went to a company called I can't remember the name of it right now, it slipped my tongue. But anyway, to make a long story short, I've been trying since April to buy one of these simulators. And at the beginning, they just said there's huge delays in their supply chain. And now once a month, they say that if you order today, you can pay us today and you can wait 12 weeks to receive your simulator. So this has affected all of us personally. I'm sure that you all have similar stories with, the iPhone being delayed or any electronics, et cetera. But this is what we mean by supply chain disruption. If you've ever had delivery dates that have been delayed from your suppliers, and even your North America suppliers who get raw materials maybe from overseas, that's kind of delays as well. Are you concerned about IP protection? This is a problem that we're seeing in the news today with with certain communist countries taking our intellectual property, and they're redesigning it, or reverse engineering it, and they're taking over sales market share from U.S. companies. And have your sales been impacted because of the delays? So these are the things that we're going to discuss today. We just wanted to kind of set the stage for what we mean by supply chain disruption. With that, I'll turn it back over to you, Isabel.
Great, thank you, Jeff. So for today, we have three main objectives that we would like to cover during this presentation. So the first one is share which are all the advantages of MultiJet fusion additive manufacturing in comparison to other traditional manufacturing technologies, such as, for example, injection molding. Secondly, we'd like to explain how MultiJet fusion could enable faster cycles of iterations, both in the design phase of the product, but also in production, because this is a reality available today. And on the third place, we'll share some examples of different use cases in different industries that are already benefiting of all these advantages of that additive manufacturing is bringing into the market. Great, so let's start. 2020, as we all have shared, this is a year that we are going to remember. COVID-19 has had a huge impact on almost every area of our society, and it will continue to influence our lives and our businesses for the foreseeable future. And in particular, and related to the manufacturing space, it has exposed a lot of weaknesses in our supply chains. We all have seen the disruptions firsthand, like shortages, for example, in TP and hand sanitizer, but also with shortages in critical medical equipment and PPE. While this presented a huge challenge for the medical world, it also has demonstrated exactly how valuable additive manufacturing can be. And HP in particular put all hands on deck in order to provide PPE and to produce parts for ventilators and other medical equipment, critical components. I've been working in HP for almost 10 years now, and I have to tell you that participating in this effort to support our first responders has been the project most rewarding for me, and the one I'm most proud of. And all of these wouldn't have been possible without additive manufacturing. For these last several months, HP, along with many others, have been working very hard to support a number of these COVID-19 response efforts. And here we have a face shield that has been designed by Avid Product Development. Avid is a manufacturer that is part of our digital manufacturing network and specializes in engineering and additive manufacturing services. They designed this frame for MultiJet fusion and then use a thin plastic sheet that is used to form the full face shield. The frame is printed straight, and then they easily snap it together for assembly. And you may be wondering why these parts are just simply printed curved with the final shape, since that's gonna be the thing that the first responders are gonna use at the end. But the thing here is how designing for additive manufacturing can make an impact in both the productivity and the cost per part we are able to achieve. So by printing this part flat, what we are able to get is more parts fitting in the same build space, which means that those parts are going to be more cost effective, but at the same time, we are going to increase as well the productivity. And in this case, we are able to print 300 of these frames per each of the builds that we have in our 5200 production system. And in total, if we are running into max capacity, that will mean that a single printer could print up to 600 of these parts per day. Another area that we tackled during these last months was the coronavirus testing. As you can imagine, and you may have seen in the news, the demand for the nasal swabs skyrocketed, and the traditional supply chain couldn't keep up. And here you can see an example of one of these traditionally manufactured swabs. In this case, HP also collaborated with some of our manufacturing partners and medical companies such as Forecast 3D, Aviogenics, and Fathom in order to recreate this part in MultiJet Fusion and provide a response to this shortage in the supply chain. In this case, we decided to use a PA11 or nylon 11 because out of all our nylon materials, it's the one that has the highest ductility, and this is one of the main requirements for these parts because we want this part to be very flexible and there's no chance of it breaking during the test. And here you can see the design that we developed for additive manufacturing with some important features. So there's a unique spiral tip that was designed for effective sample collection and a breakpoint that it's aimed to remove the handle end from the after the test has been completed. And this is already showcasing one of the benefits of additive manufacturing and one of the changes in mindset that we need to get in order to start implementing this process in production. Additive manufacturing is not about trying to get one existing design that has been produced to be manufactured by another traditional technology. It's about getting the concept of what the part needs to do, which is the function of that part, and then designing in additive in order to meet that specific function. And in most of the cases, the final design and the final solution is going to be different when we are designing for additive. And one of the reasons why it's because we have a higher freedom of design. And thanks to that, we are able to come up with more complex geometries and with other different ways to solve the same problem. Here, we collaborated together with the Harvard Medical Center, and they did a trial testing where they were evaluating different additive manufacturing swabs. And in this trial, one of the outcomes, it was that our MultiJet Fusion printed swab, it was one of the preferred options out of the 150 designs that were included during all that testing. And that was based on both the comfort and also the effectiveness of our sample collection. But I think the most compelling part of this story is the speed at which all of this happened. This investigation started at the end of March this year, and after just 4 weeks of design iterations and testings, we created a product that met all the necessary requirements. And then over the next 4 weeks, we focused on scaling the process and contacting our manufacturing partners. And for example, Forecast had the capacity to print over 100,000 of these swabs every day. And by the end of June, they announced that they had already printed over 1 million nasal swabs. So you can imagine the big impact that we can have with additive manufacturing, especially in these situations where the time to market to introduce a product in the market is very critical, as in the case of the COVID-19 testing capabilities. And in summary, in 3 months, we went from an idea to over 1 million parts printed during a time when the traditional supply chains were failing and were not able to provide these quantities of product that was required. And these two examples are a great showcase of the benefits that additive manufacturing has in comparison to traditional technologies, which could be summarized in these pillars. So the first one is the rapid innovation. You have seen that in a matter of weeks, you could have a move from an idea into a final product. Then a part of that, as we don't need to do any capital investment and we don't need to manufacture, for example, a tool, we have a very short time to market because once this design is validated, there's no restriction in order to when you are able to introduce it into the market. So that means that you could do faster introductions into the market. But then a part of that, and it's something that is very important and is taking a more important role in the coming years, is the inventories. So by using additive manufacturing, you can really minimize the quantity of inventories that you have to stock, especially thinking about spare parts. And you can move from physical inventories of parts into digital inventories, where you just keep a digital file that you print on demand according to the forecast and the quantity of parts that your customers are requiring. And all of this is really enabling more efficient supply chains, not only because of the inventories that we are able to keep, which are smaller and it can almost totally be avoided, but also because we could think about other ways to manufacture. So rather than manufacturing overseas or centralizing the manufacturing in a single place, with additive manufacturing, you have the opportunity of looking into distributed production, because you could set up different manufacturing centers in different regions, and with that, you are able to provide parts faster to your customers and be able to have a more regionalized production. And the last point is the higher capital efficiency. What we mean with this is that if you acquire a 3D printer, what you are able to do with that equipment is basically print whatever you want. While if we are thinking about traditional technologies, when you are doing the capital investment, you are already locking your design into a very specific one, because that's something that you cannot change over time. While with additive manufacturing, you do have that capability. So it doesn't matter if your design evolves over time. That's not going to mean that you need to do additional investments in terms of creating, for example, additional tooling. You can just validate that solution and do a rollover in your production. And now let's see how companies today are using and implementing our technology in their products. And to explain this, I would like to use this framework, which is the product lifecycle. So here what you see, it's in the x-axis, the time along that cycle and all the different phases that have to take place in order to produce a product, and during the full life of the product, even with the aftermarket that comes at the end of the life. And in the y-axis, we have the different production volumes that are required in each of these phases. Traditionally, when we are looking into 3D printing, or when we think about 3D printing, we think that this is a technology that is used mainly in prototyping. And this is something that has been true for the last decades and the last years, because by using 3D printing in the development, you are able to iterate very fast during the full product development. But today, we have really done several breakthroughs in terms of the speed to produce the parts, and in terms of the material robustness and the mechanical properties that we can get in our parts, which makes that we are not restricted to this space of the prototyping, but we can really move into all the different stages and phases of the product life cycle. And the first one is the bridge production. So bridging to production is the idea of using additive manufacturing for certain parts with your product as you first start ramping into the final part production, and before committing to the tooling that you will require over time. This strategy can be very powerful, and especially in cases where there is still risk in a part design that may change over time, or a part that will be completely removed because there are changes or things that you may need to improve. But it's also very interesting in cases where production volumes are unclear. So you cannot really commit into which type of tooling, for example, you would like to manufacture. Now imagine the scenario where you need to start ramping for production. So you commit to a tooling for a particular part, and maybe you wait 8 weeks for a tool to be fabricated and then to get those parts back so you can run some final tests, and then you find an issue. Now you are in a scenario where you either have to go back and adjust the tool, assuming that the change in that tool is safe, or in the worst case, there is a major change and then that part, or maybe that part isn't needed at all. And what ends up happening is that you need to scrap the tool, and therefore you are losing the investment that you have already done. So this process is not only very expensive, but there is very little flexibility and a lot of time spent waiting, and especially when there are redesigns involved. In some cases, you may even sacrifice a certain level of quality of your final product because it's simply too difficult to make fast changes, and you have a schedule to meet, so you cannot really take all these waiting times in order to go through the iterations in a mold. I know no one likes to admit that, but it's absolutely an area of risk, and especially as we see design cycles that are pushed to be faster and faster, because every time it's more important being able that you have a very short time to market. And by printing certain components, especially components with higher complexity, where there's the highest risk of change, we are able to disconnect ourselves from these constraints that we have with the physical tooling in injection molding, and drastically decrease our learning cycles with the product development process. So by using additive manufacturing, you can really shorten up as well all the time required for the validation of the manufacturing processes before you introduce them into production. And the last thing that is also very relevant is that by using additive manufacturing, both in the prototyping phase, but also in production, what you are able to do is that when you are doing all your validations during the development cycle, you are already using your final process, which is not true with the other traditional technologies, such as, for example, injection molding. So when you are moving into production, you actually have a process that has been already validated through all this development that you've done, which is really reducing the risk that you have when moving into production. And now let's see how companies are using this case of bridge production. So this is a use case that is coming from Extol. Extol is a company that specializes in automation, engineering services, and plastic assemblies technologies, like, for example, welding. And they have been running our latest material, the polypropylene, with a lot of success, especially because it's very easy to weld, as in the example that we are showing here. One important clarification is that our polypropylene material can be welded with MultiJet fusion parts, but it could also be combined with parts made of polypropylene coming from injection molding, which is actually giving a much higher flexibility in the applications where it could be used. And in this case, Extol was able to leverage the manufacturing industry familiarity that they have with the polypropylene to introduce customers into the world of additive manufacturing and ultimately help them to decrease the time to market. And this is a very good example on how they are doing this. This is a fluid reservoir, a prototype that used to be injection molded because they require a functional testing, meaning that the prototypes needed to behave like the final part. But then when they had the option to print these parts in additive manufacturing instead, what they were able to validate is that actually the 3D printed parts had a very similar behavior to the injection molded ones. So actually they could move into a bridge production by keeping the same function that they were able to achieve with injection molding. And here what we have is an example of two 3D printed parts that are welded. And what they found with the testing is that they were able to achieve a very similar part strength because these parts have to be pressurized. And that means that the parts were completely welded, but also sealed. So we were able, or they were able to achieve two parts combined that were completely sealed and could work under pressure, meeting all the requirements of their customer. And by using additive manufacturing instead of injection molding, they were able to reduce their lead time from 7 weeks into just 6 days. So we are talking about times reductions that are moving from weeks into a very limited quantity of days, which is a big improvement. And then if we keep moving through the product life cycle, the next step is full production. So how do we know when it makes sense to move to full production with additive manufacturing? Sometimes, and that these are the very easy to identify cases, the parts are very complex and additive manufacturing it's really the only option, especially when we are thinking about topology optimized parts or parts with lattice structure. Cannot be manufactured in any other way. But other times a part could be made traditionally. So when we need, in this case, we need to start looking at volumes, cost, and other part requirements in order to decide which is the direction that makes the most sense. And bridge production is actually something that can be used to delay that decision. Because, for example, if you are not sure about which are the final volumes of your product, you could start producing parts with additive manufacturing. And once your product has been introduced in the market for several months, then you can see which is that evolution on the demand, and then finally decide if you want to keep using additive manufacturing or you have volumes that are so high that it makes more sense to move, for example, into injection molding. And yeah, here we have some examples of how we are already doing this exercise internally in HP. And in this slide, you can see different products inside the HP's portfolio, not only in 3D, but also in 2D printing, where we've seen that using additive manufacturing, it makes sense in terms of cost, but also in terms of the part performance. And all these products have today several parts that are printed with MultiJet Fusion in them. But normally what happens is that the cost of the part is going to be the main driver of those decisions when we are thinking into final part production. And if we take a look into the cost, the way traditional technologies such as, for example, injection molding work is that you need to do a capital investment in the mold, and that capital investment for higher volumes is something that is very diluted among all the parts that you are producing. So when you are moving into high volumes, this is a process that is very cost effective. But when you are into shorter runs, actually that cost investment, when you are trying to amortize that across the quantity of parts that you are going to produce, it's actually generating a higher cost per part. And then if we took the same exact part that we have designed for injection molding and we try to print it in MultiJet Fusion, we would not get the most successful cost result. So here we will have also an upfront cost if you are acquiring the equipment for the first time. As in any of the cases when you have a new technology that you are bringing in-house. And over time, the final part cost will just depend on the material, agents, and other consumables that are used to print that part. So once you have your process or your capital investment completely amortized. And this is often higher than a typical injection molded part, especially when you consider the parts that are not designed for MultiJet Fusion. And the fact that there is often more material in the design that is needed for this function. And why is this? Because for injection molding, we need uniform walls that have to be connected in order to generate a part that can be actually produced. So here again, this is one of the things that I would like to reinforce during the presentation. When we are thinking about full production with additive manufacturing, it's not just about taking one part that has been designed for injection molding and printed. the most effective cost, you are going to get it by thinking about which is the function of that part, or even which is the function of the assembly, as we are going to see afterwards, and how you can design it for additive manufacturing and really optimize it. So you can get the best performance, but you can also minimize the cost of that part.
Yeah, I'd like to just add something real quick to that, Isabel. So, we've worked with many companies that go through this product life cycle with plastic injection molded parts that produce, let's say hundreds to thousands of units a year versus millions and millions of units a year. And, low volume production is something that we fit really well into. But with these plastic injection molded companies that do these types of products where they do 100 to let's say 5,000 or 10,000 a year, what they realized is that they could justify the cost of buying a printer just by the alleviation of one mold in their design cycle. So, it all depends on the complexity of the parts that you're manufacturing, and also, as Isabel had mentioned, the ability to consolidate parts that are assembled after the fact into single parts, which is something that we do very well. Those cost savings really hit their bottom line. And like I said, their comment was, or we hear it often, but I'm just thinking of one particular example. If we can alleviate the cost of one mold during the product development life cycle, we can justify the cost of a printer.
Yeah, excellent comment. And yeah, this is exactly the situation that we are seeing with different companies today. So as you can see here, if you start like really thinking about how to optimize that part for additive manufacturing, this curve that we have in terms of the cost per part for MultiJet fusion, it can really go down just by looking into a single part. And then if you compare it with other processes, because you may think, okay, for low volume parts, I'm not going to do a mold. What I'm going to do is CNC instead. And this is actually a great opportunity for additive manufacturing as well, because what we see is that, especially if we are comparing our process against CNC design parts, we can really optimize those parts to be printed for additive. And here we get two main benefits. So the first one, and it's the most important one, is that we can really reduce the cost, and we are very competitive against CNC machine parts. But then the second one is that normally what we are doing is that in order to optimize the parts for additive, we are also reducing the quantity of material that is being used in CNC. And with that, what we have is a weight reduction as well. And this, it's very important in some industries, like for example, in automotive, especially for electric vehicles, even drones, where the weight is a main constraint. We can really get parts and products that are very optimized in those regards.
Yeah, this is a very good example. That example is actually an HP example. That part lives on one of our wide format 2D printers that we sell. Those are $1 million machines, obviously, and we're always looking to reduce the cost of our equipment. And this particular example, Isabel had suggested that we reduce material, but if you really look at that, there's an enormous amount of waste as well on that CNC part. Even if you start with a block that's about the same size, you're reducing probably more than half of it through cutting, and all that just ends up, that money ends up on your shop floor. With additive manufacturing, we're printing and there is no waste of material, and we actually recycle the unused powder. So significant savings.
Yes, and then coming back to the concept that we were discussing before, it's not just about looking at the part level, but the most benefits for additive manufacturing, you are going to get them when you are looking into assemblies. So normally what happens, and especially, for example, in tubes or pipelines, but yeah, there are examples in a lot of different types of assemblies and mechanisms, is that the fact that you have several parts, it's normally given by limitations that you have in your manufacturing technology, because they can not really produce very complex geometries. But then when we are moving into additive, we have a much more freedom of design, and we can like really do very complex parts just in a single piece. So here there's a big and huge opportunity in terms of unification of different parts together. And when we are looking into this unification, we are not saving just one mold, but we could look into saving different molds, because we can today unify the parts or different parts in a single one. So this is a huge opportunity, and it's something that we really encourage our customers to do. It's like, okay, which are your optimization opportunities? And if you are designing products today, I'm pretty sure that you can already come up with a couple of examples where this could be possible. And this has other benefits as well related to the assembly process. So by having less parts in a product, the assembly time, it's going to be minimized as well, and you will require less labor time in order to put all those components in place. And a great example of this is this company that is called CGX, which is actually based in San Diego. So CGX designs and manufactures this type of headsets that are used for EEG studies. And this product in specific has 20 different channels that are used to monitor brain waves, which are used in medical studies. And this type of product, it has low volume because it's a very specialized system, and they cannot really justify the cost and lead times associated with tooling. So when they were thinking about how to move this into production, additive manufacturing, it was a very good solution for them. And actually, I have to say that they have done a very good job in terms of how to optimize their design for additive. And as a result of that, today, 95% of the components in these headsets are parts that are produced with MultiJet fusion in two main materials, PA12 and PA11. PA12 is mainly focused on the electronic cases that you can see, and PA11, again, as this material has a higher flexibility than the PA12, is the one that is used for each of the sensors, because it's going to give more flexibility for the positioning of each of these components. And yeah, we've talked about low volume production. We've talked about different manufacturing technologies, but one of the things I would like to share with you today in this presentation is which are the drivers that you have in order to decide which is going to be your final manufacturing technology. So here you can see that there are two main drivers. That one is going to be the quantity of parts that you produce in a year. The second is going to be the accuracy that you need to get in your parts. So for example, if we focus in accuracy, we know that CNC is going to be the best process in those regards. So if you have any specific requirements in your parts that are related to that, that would probably be the best pick. And if we look into high volume, so here we have a similar thing, but in the case of injection molding. So for very high volumes, what we've seen is that traditionally, the best way to produce those parts is with hard steel molds. But now, if we start to introduce the concept of additive manufacturing, how do we play in this space? So traditionally, what happened is that most of the additive manufacturing technologies were considered good candidates for parts when they require relatively low accuracy or accuracy similar to the aluminum or soft tooling molds, but for a low volume production, because especially because of the speed, those parts were not able to be produced in very high quantities. But today with MultiJet fusion, we have been able to develop a process that is fast enough in order to produce a good amount of parts that is going to make our process and more competitive for a higher range of volume parts. So if we are just taking a look into the cost per part. So we are really pushing the limits of the technology to move into the right side of this table that you can see here. And then the other thing is, okay, what happens if I have a part that it has some features that are very critical where I need to get a very accurate dimensions. So in this case, the option that we've seen and actually some of our customers are already using is that you could print the part with MultiJet Fusion. You can get all the benefits that you have in terms of all the freedom of design. And then for those specific critical features, like for example, a hole where you need to insert a pin or something that you are going to use as a datum, you could think about a hybrid production where the body of the part is printed with MultiJet Fusion, and you are machining just those specific areas where you need the additional accuracy that just the CNC process is going to give you. So this is a reality. Our parts are machinable, and this is a great way of overcome or combine the benefits that you have from different design technologies. And then the last thing is that we really have an opportunity of starting to design parts that were not designed before because no one was able to produce them. But actually, some of these complexities, it's something that we can combine today by unifying different components into single parts, or we can even think about performance improvements. For example, in terms of flows, if we are doing CFD analysis, or in terms of topology optimization, that today it's already enabled with MultiJet Fusion. So you could do all these designs that are highly optimized, and you could print them with additive. While in the past, this was not an opportunity or something that was viable. So when we are looking into complexity parts and we can really optimize the performance of the products, actually we can move into all the full space in terms of volumes, because now we are not just talking about cost, we are talking about which is the value that I'm adding into my product by using additive manufacturing. And some examples of this is what you can see on the right side of the slide. So the first part that you can see there, it's a duct that has been optimized through CFD analysis. And based on that analysis, this was the shape that was producing the best flow efficiency. And actually, we were able to get up to 20% higher efficiency in terms of the flow from moving from the original design that was a combination of different components into this unified design for additive. And another great example is as well what we can get in terms of lattice structures that we are adding into the products or personalization. So today, making or producing products that are totally personalized is something that is for free with MultiJet Fusion, because it doesn't matter which are the parts or the geometries that you are printing. You can print them all together at the same time, and all those parts could be completely unique without having any additional impact in your cost per part. So this is actually a paradigm shift, because in injection molding, the situation that you have is completely the opposite. So you have a mass production situation. But with additive manufacturing, you can move from there into mass customization. So today is a reality, the fact of printing unique parts in high volumes. And that's something that you can just achieve with additive manufacturing.
Yeah, just to give you an example of that, we have a customer in Nashville, Tennessee. Their name is Smile Direct, and they produce 60,000 parts a day, or 1.8 million parts a month, and they're all unique. So, they do the dental aligners to fix your teeth. So you can imagine the treatment plan is multiple weeks, and it changes your mouth, and they use our products to mold the aligners.
Yeah, and here you can see some examples. So these are the molds of the aligners that Smile Direct is printing. As Jeff was mentioning, this is a I would say, the best example that we have in terms of mass customization in production. So they are printing every day more than 50,000 molds. And each of these molds that they are printing is completely unique and different from any other one. And the cost of these parts is very, very competitive and very compelling, like even in comparison to any other technology that you may use to produce them. And actually, 3D printing additive manufacturing made this company and this business case a reality, because they wouldn't be able to produce these aligners in any other method rather than additive manufacturing, and to be competitive by doing that. Good. And yeah, then the last area that we have in the product life cycle, it's the spare parts, and how we can move from these physical inventories into digital inventories. And then for this, I have an example that it's been developed through Fast Radius, which is one of our manufacturing partners. And what they did with Satair, which is their customer, is to develop this part that you can see here in the example, that actually is printed in color with our color printer, which actually can provide additional benefits as well, because, for example, you could print QR codes, as you can see here in the image, and it can print, well, full color parts, as in this case, but it can also combine all types of colors and generate textures or generate any type of 2D map that you may think about, for example, pictures or similar to that. And then here, the advantage that they are able to get with this part is that they can fulfill orders around the world in less than 48 hours, which is really a breakthrough in terms of production of this type of parts. And one of the things to take into consideration is that in order to really move into production, what we needed to do is to create all the ecosystem of manufacturing, and especially manufacturing partners. So one of the things that we've done in HP is to generate this network of digital manufacturing partners that are all these different companies that you can see in the slide, that are really ready to produce products that can go into production, because they are meeting the industry standards, because they have the proper processes in place. They can really produce parts with the best quality, and they can provide all types of QMS, quality manufacturing, quality management systems that you need for your products and for your final parts. So this is something that is a reality today. And one of the best examples that we have is our 580 printer. So this is the printer that is able to produce parts in color. Some examples are the ones that you can see here in the screen. And here, what we were able to achieve, it's actually introduce a very high amount of parts in the printer itself that are printed today with a MultiJet Fusion. And the strategy that we follow is to make sure that all the complexity that we have in the systems, it's actually moved into the parts that are 3D printed. Because as I was mentioning before, one of the advantages is that with 3D printing, you can really iterate until the last day that you have before introducing the part into the market. And the way to combine this and do some hybrid manufacturing of this type of systems is that the areas of the system where you don't really expect changes, those are areas that can be manufactured with standard and relatively inexpensive processes, like, for example, sheet metal. And the complexity and the areas where you really expect changes, those are the ones that you can produce with additive, and you can iterate all across your product development. And by using this strategy here, what we were able to achieve is savings in times that are very, very relevant. And we are talking here about a total saving in terms of time that goes from 13 up to 26 weeks. 26 weeks in terms of all the reduction of the development time. And as a result of this type of strategies, we were able to produce more than 140 unique parts that are today introduced in every single 580 printer that is in the market. And to finalize the presentation, one of the things I wanted to go briefly through is how our process works and how are we different to competitors or other 3D printing technologies that are available in the market today. So the first thing to take into account is that we are using a powder as a raw material in order to print the parts. And that powder is a thermoplastic, which is the same family of materials that is used in injection molding. So when we are printing parts, what we have is in each of the layers, we spread this powder, and then we apply two different agents, a fusing and a detailing agent. So in the areas where we would like to create the part, we are going to place the fusing agent. And on the borders of that part, what we will have is a detailing agent that is going to act as a thermal barrier, because afterwards what happens is that we apply infrared light. So in the areas where we have the fusing agent, the temperature in the powder is going above the melting point. So we are physically fusing those parts, and this detailing agent that is surrounding the part is really avoiding all the powder that is surrounding those parts to fuse. So it's acting as this thermal barrier. And by doing this and repeating this process in each of the layers, we are able to generate the final parts. And one of the advantages that we have with our process is that we can be very fast, because it doesn't matter what you have in each of the layers. All the parts that you have in each of the layers are printed at the same time in a single pass of our carriage. And the mechanical properties that we are able to get are very robust and are very comparable to what you are able to get with injection molding. Good. And yeah, we are a bit running out of time here, so I think I will stop the presentation at this point, and we will open up questions, so we can make sure that we can answer any question that you may have regarding the topics that we've covered today.
Yeah, thank you, Isabel and Jeff. Very, very useful information, and I know there's a lot of information that we're communicating here. So Sarah, did we have any questions that come up during the presentation?
We had a few questions. The first is, could you give some reference for cost for a part?
Yeah, excellent question. So in terms of the cost per part, that's going to depend on the geometry, the size, and the volume of each of them. But a very good example could be the dental aligners that Smile Direct is printing, as we've seen in one of the slides. So each of those parts could be printed with a cost that is around $1.
Great. Last question is, what are the steps to adopt additive manufacturing in a company that is new to this space?
Great, excellent question. And yeah, actually, for that, one of the first things to take into account is you need to define a process that is gonna introduce in your funnel of candidates to print in additive manufacturing all the different parts that could be possible to actually move into MultiJet fusion. And what I'm trying to say with that is that you have to look into single parts, also assemblies, because there you could see opportunities of unification of them, and also plastic parts, but and metal parts. Because normally what happens in some cases is that some customers are just focusing on their plastic parts, but as we've seen, we have opportunities as well to move some of the CNC machine parts into additive as well, because they don't need to be metallic. In some cases, it's just they are made in metal because it's cheaper or faster to do them this way. And being able to capture as well these opportunities is gonna create a higher funnel and more successful quantity of parts moved into additive. So that's the first thing. Once you have that funnel of candidates, you have to take a look into the different engineering requirements in terms of the accuracy that you require, in terms of, for example, which is the cosmetic requirements, if you need a specific color, so you can iterate in that process by looking into post-processing options, by looking, for example, into hybrid production, as we've mentioned, and so on. And then after that, you have to make all the economical analysis. So you can really compare with the option that you have today for additive, how is it in regards to the cost in comparison to a traditional technology. And all of this is going to be an iterative process. So if there's a part that doesn't work at the first time that you are doing all this type of analysis, it's something that you could iterate into. And because by doing this iteration and by modifying the designs, you can really be more successful in the process. And this is something that we can definitely help into, because we have all the expertise and all the learnings that we've gotten from working with different companies. And if you want to start doing all this internal analysis, is something that we will be more than happy to help with.
Great, thank you, Isabel. That's all of our questions. Andy, I'll pass it back to you.
Great, thank you, Isabel. Thank you, Jeff and Sarah. As Isabel mentioned, we're here to help. So I know we threw a lot of information at you today, but there's a lot of applications and ways to reduce dependency on your supply chain and how to speed up production. We will help you find those ways and look at how you're doing things today and really work with you to come up with the right solution. So please get in touch with Saratech, and we'll get the right resources to work with you to make that happen. Thank you everyone for attending, and we hope to see you on a future webcast. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Isabel, and thank you, Sarah.
Thanks for checking out our channel. If you like what you saw, make sure to like and subscribe down below so you don't miss out on any new videos. Follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter for the latest engineering news and information. And to see all of our upcoming events, please visit our website at saratech.com/events.